So the really no really is,
because we were talking about.
I call Jason. I go.
movies,
I
yep.
see this headline. The mob, by the way, is always interesting to people. Movies, shows. And I see a headline, sorry, we dissolved your son in acid. Mafia bosses tell parents. And I go, A, they got the wrong guy. But they apologized during the trial, and they said they want to make good for it and give them some money and an apartment. Oh, okay. All right. Okay, all right.
And by the way, they apologized.
Anybody can make a mistake.
They apologized.
Really? No, really? Really? No, really? Really?
We have with us a very special guest who knows a lot about the mob, maybe more than just about anybody about the mob, other than a made man. Why don't
You bet. We are talking today with the Vice President of Exhibits and Programs for the Mob Museum here in Las Vegas. He was a wonderful journalist, 25-year career in journalism with at the Las Vegas Sun, Las Vegas City Life, Las Vegas Mercury, every paper in Las Vegas.
He's worked.
He couldn't
Can't
hold a
keep a
job.
job.
Couldn't hold a job. The author of Sun, Sin, and Suburbia, A History of Modern Las Vegas, as well as the book Howard Hughes, Power, Paranoia, and Palace Intrigue. Would you please welcome to our program Geoff Schumacher. Hello, Jeff.
Don't hold for applause, Jeff. You can't hear.
Yeah, honestly. They're still clapping. But
Thank
we
you
won't
for
stop.
coming in. So the mob, I mean, you built a mob museum. So basically, you invested in the fact that the mob is that popular, which they are. People are fascinated still.
People are absolutely fascinated by the mob today, even though, as you note, they're not in the news quite as much as they used to be.
See?
No, but they are still in the news. New York, there's trials going on.
They're still in the news. It's kind of like when, they're not like they used to be. They're much smaller.
Right.
They're a little more behind the scenes. They're not like John Gotti walking down the street.
I was going to say, I probably couldn't name a mobster, an Italian mobster who should be in the. I probably couldn't name him.
And I'm from Philadelphia. So I come from Angelo Bruno, Little Nicky Scarfo, all these guys. And I worked in a factory on Delaware and Tasker Avenue. And my shop foreman, my union rep, was the Irishman.
Wow.
Actually, yeah,
Right,
which is
sure.
pretty well. And I didn't know as a kid. He's a tough guy who was a union rep, and that was it. And those were the days of dealing with Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah.
But the mob today, are they? First of all, let's go back to the Mob Museum.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm sure you did the research to say that this city would support it, and this is the city basically as you drive around here, that was basically built by the mob.
In some ways it was, especially here on the Las Vegas Strip. But I actually bristle a little bit at that idea that the mob invented Las Vegas, because it was a city for like 40 years before the mob even took an interest, But that's a local talking, right? The reality is that, Bugsy Siegel arrived in Las Vegas in 1946 and started building the Flamingo Hotel. There's a big backstory to that we could get into. But the point is that that really marked the arrival of the mob in Las Vegas. And this became kind of a nexus for all different mob groups all over the country. And so it's kind of a perfect place to have the Mob Museum, because you can talk about Chicago and Detroit and Philadelphia and Boston and New York and LA, and they all have a connection here in Las Vegas.
And can I just say, because I am going to be fairly ignorant about a lot of this. The different cities, was it a dominant family in every city, or were all the families represented in all the big cities?
All of the major cities most of the major cities in America in the mid-century of the 20th century, 50s, 60s, 70s, had some kind of a mafia group going on, a mafia family. And they often communicated with, the guys in New York or Chicago. There was a bit of a hierarchy there. They had like a board of directors called the Commission. And this commission was created back in the 30s by Lucky Luciano. But the commission was, 7 or 8 guys, the New York guys, the Chicago bosses got together, and they would sort of set policy for the whole country. And they would settle disputes, and they would, deal with different problems that were going on among the different factions and kind of try to keep the peace. We know from reading the newspapers that they weren't always successful in keeping the peace, but they tried, and kind of like a board of directors,
What's amazing about the Mafia, and I want to ask you if the movies are accurate, like The Godfather, how accurate you think they are. But in reading a lot about this, preparing for you, I never realized the psychology behind it, that you co-opt somebody who comes from a background where underprivileged, not necessarily embraced by society, like over here, Italian, Irish, whatever, we're not immediately embraced. So you had that culture, you gave a kid an opportunity to come in, and then you raised them where they were dedicated to the group, and you lost your individuality. It was all about the group. It was not about the person. And after a while, your mindset becomes just that, the oaths you take, the family involvement, and it really immerses you in this culture where everybody's going, not about, no, this isn't about you. You got to do that because, so you don't question
Well, it's like the
what
military.
they ask you to do. Yeah, you don't, it's a bigger thing. And it's
Somewhat like the military, and your devotion is to the boss. And if the boss says, kill your mother, sadly, you have to do that. It's not your devotion becomes to the mafia family more than your own family, which is a little bit twisted.
well, and also the oath, which is the omerta, where you don't flip,
Right.
is kind of, there's been a lot of flipping.
That I think is a generational thing. I think that really, as sentences got more severe, drug sentences and the RICO cases, these guys were looking at not 2 years in the can like they used to do back in the 20s and 30s. Oh, I can do 2 years, it's no problem, and not flip. But now it's like 20, 30 years, and these guys nowadays are like, oh man, that's not going to fly.
Is that Giuliani? Is that when Giuliani did the big crackdown in New York? That was really the beginning of this.
I think yes, roughly. The RICO statute was passed in 1970, but federal prosecutors didn't get excited about it until a little bit later in the 80s. Giuliani and his crew really went after the New York Mafia and were very successful in decimating those families.
And are they decimated or are they under the radar?
Is it that? Are they quieter and less active, or are they just publicly quieter and less active?
So this is a huge debate within the little world of mob historians. But I think you'll find that there are people who will say that the traditional mob is almost gone, that it's really just petty crime at this point by comparison with, say, the Mexican drug cartels, right? Or the Russian mafia in New York. But other people will say, no, these guys are just quieter. They're keeping a low profile, and they're still involved in a lot of stuff. And I think that's true. I think they're still involved in bookmaking. I think they're involved in smuggling, and they're also getting involved in more sophisticated stuff like on Wall Street, cybercrime kind of stuff, cryptocurrency. They're getting involved in some really
I heard
sophisticated
solar,
things.
that they're actually in solar. They're in solar,
And Jeff,
renewables.
Who isn't in solar?
when you say you think, is that like a wink, I think, or are you saying I know, but I don't know if you know what I'm saying?
Well, one of the things about the mob is they don't keep a lot of notes, right? So it's not like you can go look back in their memoirs and find out what they were doing. Right. So there's a lot of guessing that goes on, even in law enforcement. When you go back and look at the FBI files, in which we all do in my field, and you go back and look at what they were saying was happening in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, there's a lot of guesswork in there, and there's a lot of mistakes. And they hear something. A bartender tells an FBI agent, oh, yeah, Vinny is involved in the mob, and he puts it in his report, whether it's valid or not, So you really have to sift through carefully as a historian and figure out what's real.
You also find that in reading about this and hearing about this, that mobsters who do talk and come out publicly tend to exaggerate their role. We know some guys who are mob adjacent who would say, oh, that guy, he really didn't do all, he's playing it bigger than he was. He was never that big. Is there that pettiness and that exaggeration and all that goes on, so it's really hard to peg what a guy did anyway?
I think a lot of times today, if it's 2023 and there's a guy on social media talking about how he's a big mob guy, he's probably not a big mob guy, right? Because everybody's watching, everybody in law enforcement and everywhere else is keeping an eye on things nowadays, more so than ever. And if you're bragging about it publicly, you're probably not a big mob guy.
And was that so? Like when Henry Hill was on the Howard Stern show repeatedly telling his stories, was he inflating his stories, or was he kind of a real?
No, I think Henry Hill was a real mob guy.
Yeah.
And what he got involved later, with being very public, obviously after Goodfellas and everything. And he kind of turned that into a personality that was really the forerunner of some of the guys you see today competing with you for podcasting, like Sammy the Bull Gravano and Michael Francis, people like that.
Sammy the Bull is competing with us?
Well, I don't know if he's directly competing with you guys, but he's...
You gonna challenge him?
No, well, he's 90, but then again,
90 with friends.
Sammy, best of luck.
Yeah.
You need anything from us? Microphones, anything?
He has a very popular podcast, that's all.
And what does he talk? Does he talk just mob?
A lot. He talks a lot about his life, and he talks about the crimes he was involved in. He talks about the people that he was with,
Now,
Gotti. And others.
Sammy turned evidence,
Yeah.
from what I remember, and then he went witness protection.
Correct.
And he had plastic surgery.
And
didn't
now
he?
he's doing a podcast?
Yes.
Wow.
That's when you.
Yeah.
But then didn't he get popped again in witness protection?
So he was a government witness against Gotti, and he admitted during the course of that testimony that he was involved in 19 murders. That's pretty bad. But he got a very light sentence because he was such a good government witness. But after he got out, his first stint in prison, he got involved in drug dealing down in Arizona and got busted again. And he went to jail for, I think, 17 years.
Woof.
He got out, and now he is
Went legit podcasting.
Yeah.
Only place left.
Yeah.
The last refuge
Sam, we're not
of
laughing at you.
scoundrels.
We're laughing with you.
You bet.
You bet.
You
Not at all. Not
bet.
at all. That. Wow. How many? There's got to be a lot of you. You have a great crime podcast, by the way, that really delves deep. And one of the things that blew me away was they blew up a parking garage in Vegas to get rid of a witness. Usually in Vegas, the mob or guys don't want to do anything negative because people are coming here with money to gamble, and you don't want to say Vegas is not safe. So blowing up a parking garage in the heart of Vegas.
Yeah.
How did they decide to do that? And did somebody then take that guy and say, you're going to learn a lesson here?
Well, that's a good point. By and large, the reputation of Las Vegas mob is if you're going to kill somebody, you take them out in the desert and bury them in the desert, right? You don't want that publicity to be connected to Las Vegas because tourists come here.
Right.
But you also don't, there's a little bit of a mystique involved, right? People come to Vegas because it's a little bit dangerous, or they think it is, right? I might be, back in the day, you would sit down next to a mobster in the lounge. Ooh, that'd be interesting. Or, I better not do something fishy in this casino or else somebody's going to take me out back. There's a bit of that, that you get that people actually are drawn here because of that. But in the case of the exploded car in the parking garage, that was in the early 70s. And yeah, I would have thought that would have been wiser to take out of town.
And who did they blow up?
It was a guy who owned a retired FBI agent who owned a piece of property downtown that was in dispute. This had to do with Binion's Horseshoe Club downtown, which is still there, not owned by the Binion family anymore. But basically the origins of Las Vegas are all in the downtown area, and that was the original town site. And so there were all these little tiny lots because it was the railroad came through town in 1905. They sold all these lots. There were these little tiny lots. And so if you build a big casino downtown, you might have 15 people owning different pieces of the land beneath the hotel. It's a great racket because now 3 generations later, those families are still pocketing
collecting.
lease money from that.
But Jeff, why? I'm sorry to interrupt, but why?
No.
If you wanted to take out that FBI guy, why a car bomb as opposed to just the traditional run up and 2 shots in the head or whatever the hell it was? Why would you? Was that to send a message of a different kind?
Well, I will say that the 1970s were like a time when, for whatever reason, the mob decided that blowing up cars was the way to go. It was just a thing. Like Cleveland became known as Bomb City, USA, because it seemed like every week another car was exploding. And famously, a mobster named Danny Green, an Irish mobster in Cleveland, was blown up. And interestingly, I think it's a dentist's office, and it wasn't his car that blew up. It was the one next to it. Somebody parked the car next to him with a bomb in it, and then when they saw him arrive at his car, boom. So if you look
Did
at
it take him out? It took him out?
it took him out. He died. And so Las Vegas must have picked up on this popular trend.
But I thought, and I guess I'm wrong. I thought that the old mafia, the traditional mob, prided themselves on not creating collateral damage. That it was very specific. And I was referencing before about if a guy crossed them, they would whack him, but they wouldn't touch the family. They wouldn't touch. True, not true?
I think there's some truth to that. I think that you look back at what Bugsy Siegel famously told Del Webb. Del Webb was a contractor building the Flamingo Hotel for him. Del Webb later went on to own the New York Yankees, and he was like a really big developer, casino owner, everything.
Huge, yeah.
All the Sun City communities all over the country. Well, before that, he was a contractor, and he was building the Flamingo for Bugsy, and Bugsy owed him a lot of money, like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And Del Webb was a little nervous about asking for his money. And Bugsy said to him, "Don't worry, Del, we only kill each other," right? That was the notion that, we're not going to kill innocent people. We're not going to kill politicians or journalists or whatever. But if you study it, as I have in this kind of depth, you turn to find out a lot of innocent victims along the way.
Yeah.
Kids are killed. People, just innocent bystanders, are killed. The bombings were a part of this.
Yeah.
And it's just a lot of, I think, careless people who weren't following those bylaws.
So, as you say that, I'm thinking, so how did you decide to devote your life and as a journalist into this, number one? And the second part of that is, along the way, any threats or even stern talking tos about, what, maybe you shouldn't write about? I'm not saying don't.
I'm not telling you what to write. I'm just saying maybe
we know where your family.
Yeah, maybe it's a traffic report kind of.
Well, I was a journalist here in Las Vegas and for a stint in Iowa. And I thought journalism would be the thing I did my whole life. And, that business has changed a little bit. And so I was looking for another opportunity to use my skills. And the museum job came along, and it was kind of perfect because I had taken an interest in history in the latter part of my journalism career, and wrote a couple of books, which you mentioned, about the history of Las Vegas and about Howard Hughes in Las Vegas. And a lot of the mob was in those books. So you can't avoid Las Vegas history without the mob. So when this job came up, I'm like, yeah, I'm in. And now, since then, I've really just absolutely immersed myself in this topic. And to answer your second question, no, I have not been threatened in any. I actually probably got more threats as a journalist than I have at
Really?
the museum.
Nobody.
Well, I would imagine that they would be, in some ways, rather thrilled to have somebody like you who really knows their history and can tell their stories objectively. And
That's absolutely true. And in fact, my experience is that now there's been sort of a sea change, because I think if we had tried to open the mob museum in, I don't know, let's say 1990, when the mob was still really big, it would have been weird, because there would have been so many active members out there who probably didn't want their stories told and might have in fact threatened somebody. But we opened in 2012, and now we've been open for 11 years. And at this juncture, people were like, love this stuff. Even the people who are in it or were in it. You used the phrase mob adjacent. There's tons of people like that. Oh, my uncle did this, or my grandfather did this, and they want to learn more about it.
Yeah.
And there's still members of the family who will say, oh, we don't talk about that. They've just got that tradition ingrained. But there's others who I'm going to spill, and they just start talking.
It's interesting. I just read an article, I think in New Yorker magazine, about a woman whose uncle was a major, I forget if it was which mobster, but a major mobster. And she said we used to vacation with him, and he was lovely, and we never talked about what he did, and they kind of knew what he did, but it was kept really far from the family, and they tried to keep their family out of it.
Yep.
Is that more accurate than the movies portray? Or did the families all know?
I think the families only knew what the guys who were involved wanted them to know. In other words, they were pretty protective of what they were doing. That said, there's different traditions, right? And this is not a knock on anybody, but like in the Italian American tradition, a lot of times the sons would come up within the mafia, right? And they would join the father and be trained in the field, if you will. In the Jewish tradition, much more so, no, you need to go to college.
Right.
You need to go get out of this business. And so it kind of depended on the family, the boss.
Well, that was my dad. Peter knows my dad. My dad was full of stories. He was one of those guys, and I'm not always sure which are absolutely true and which are not. But as a young man, growing up on the Lower East Side of New York, he claims to have been friendly with and occasionally helped out some of the guys in the Jewish mob. And the one name that I do remember was a guy named K.O. Konigsberg.
I know.
You know the name? Oh, my God.
Yeah. And apparently K.O. was a friend of his as a young guy. And my dad knew a lot of cops. And he said, all he did for them is sometimes they'd get arrested. Cops would specifically arrest them on a Friday afternoon, knowing that they'd never get in front of a judge before Monday or Tuesday. So that was a way of, sort of boxing them up by throwing. And my dad would go down and knew the cops and went, let's bail them out and get them out. Yeah. But and I never believed him until my bar mitzvah, and so, son of a gun, there was a table of killers and my guys that looked like they would kill you at my bar mitzvah, and that's my old friends. You don't have to go over.
What
there
did you
and
get
shake
as
hands.
gifts?
Money. They give you envelopes of money. You're a good kid. You're a good kid.
Stained or clean?
And the stay in school. But going back to the Italian mob. So if you were the kid of one of those mobs and you wanted nothing to do with the family, could you keep your distance?
I think so. I think you could. You could make a decision, and sometimes the father would kind of evaluate the kids, right?
Yeah.
There may be one of the boys looks like he's not exactly college material, right?
Yeah.
So maybe he's a guy who we can bring him into the mob. The other kid is like really smart or he's really talented. Hey, he wants to be in theater.
Right.
So, okay, let's kind of, he's not a guy who's going to go and beat somebody up over $20.
Right.
So let's let him do his thing over here. I think that was possible.
I also laughed at this headline. Old New York mobsters reportedly fear handing over reins to phone-obsessed soft millennials.
I saw that.
And one of them, Ralph DiMatteo, was forced to hand himself on a federal racketeering case a day after his son tweeted a photo of him relaxing in a Florida pool. And they're going, I can't retire because I got to micromanage it. They're tweeting, they're texting, they're taking pictures. We're all going to go down because of cell phones. Is that correct?
It is true. It's also true, and even in the Mexican cartels, it's true. And all these younger people, they just can't not put themselves out there, right? And so they're doing YouTube cooking videos. They're doing all kinds of stuff, and they're getting caught as a result. There was famously even an older Italian mafia in Italy, Sicilian mafia guy had been wanted for like 20 years. He'd been in hiding, and they found him because he did a YouTube video cooking.
Worked at a pizza place.
I'll show you how to make sauce for 100
This
guys.
is it. Mafia boss working as pizza place, pizza boss.
Yep.
And he was so
Really?
proud of,
No, really.
I make a great pizza.
Is that Godfather's pizza? Is that how it got started?
No, we're better than Godfather.
okay, all right.
Or used to be till I got into the joint. So back to what you were saying as far as owning the land. Do they still own, these families still own the land under Caesar's Palace, under all these hotels?
I'm mostly referring to downtown.
Okay,
Downtown. There's still a lot of really weird land ownership stuff in downtown, and people who haven't lived in Vegas for decades are just received their monthly lease payments.
And are they vetted? I don't know what year it is. What year did the commission start coming in and vetting everybody's background if you're going to invest in a casino to make sure you are not associated?
Well, so Las Vegas regulation of casinos took a while. We started really having mobsters come in around the mid-'40s. We actually got serious about it in the '70s when the movie Casino, if you
Right,
recognize, there was a thing called the Black Book. And the Black Book was a list of undesirable people who were not allowed to go into casinos, not even step foot in a casino, or you'd be in trouble, and the casino would be in trouble. And the Black Book actually started in 1960, and one of the first crises was Frank Sinatra owned the Cal Neva Lodge up at Lake Tahoe, which was a casino. But he was really a front for Sam Giancana of the Chicago outfit. Sinatra owned this Cal Neva Lodge, and Sam Giancana was hanging around the casino. He was in the Black Book, Sam Giancana. And so he was witnessed in the lodge. He was actually involved in a fight, like an argument, on the casino floor, and everybody noticed it. This came to the attention of the Las Vegas authorities, or the Nevada authorities, I should say, and they called Sinatra and said, you can't have this guy in your casino. He's on the Black Book. And Sinatra, being Sinatra, cussed a line, over the phone to this gaming control agent, F this, F that, no way, leave me alone, I'm, blah, blah, blah. Well, this got him in such trouble, such hot water, that he had to relinquish his ownership of the Cal Neva Lodge, as well as his 9% ownership of the Sands Hotel. And so there were consequences really starting around then.
Whoa, 9%?
Of the Sands.
So he, at that time, was getting almost 10% of the net revenue that was coming in?
Yep, and he lost that.
And that was revenue, because we know that from Joan Rivers.
So should I tell the Joan?
Yeah, tell the Joan
So
story.
I think I told this to you. So Joan Rivers, we were very close. I worked with her. We traveled together. She's like a mom to me. And I wish she was still around to tell stories. But she was in Vegas in the 60s and 70s. And she was appearing in I think I'm getting this right, in one of not the main rooms, but in one of the lounges. And the head of one of the hotels, I'm not going to mention the hotel, she heard the president wanted to see her
After a show.
after a show. So she goes in. She said the office was the size of Vegas. It was giant, and he's a little guy sitting behind the desk. And she sat down, and he said, "You know what, Joan? I got word that you are just terrific. You're going to be a huge star." She goes, "Thank you very much." And he said, "You know, you don't understand what I'm saying. When they tell me how funny, when it gets to me, that's something
You're
special.
good.
You're
You're
good.
good.
You're going to be something special." And she said, "Well, I appreciate it." He said, "No, you still understand what I'm
And I
saying.
heard that you had a night tonight.
You're great. You're
that was
just funny.
fantastic.
You're killer. You're wonderful." And she goes, "Yeah." But he goes, no. Listen to me. You have a huge career ahead of you. And he said, "But let me mention something, ask you a question. We make $1 million a minute in the casino, and you went 7 minutes over. Were you $7 million funny?" And she said, she picked up her bag, she got up, she left the casino, and never went over again. The message loud and clear that she's there just to draw people in.
Yeah.
Yes, we love you, but
Yeah.
you're there for a
And you're
reason.
going to have a big career
Yeah.
unless you do that again.
Right. Does that sound like a pretty accurate story
It
from those
sounds,
days?
it sounds very plausible to me. You know, especially in the 50s, 60s, 70s, everything was a loss leader for the casino. So, you know, they were handing out, you know, free drinks. They were handing out free access to the lounge to see Frank Sinatra play or Joan Rivers. They were giving out free rooms and everything else. And because there was so much gambling going on, that's where all the money was.
Right.
And that was the MO. Now, today, you know, it's not a criticism, but it's a different dynamic. Corporations own these places, and every single part of the operation needs to make money, right? So that's why it's very expensive.
So when was the last casino owner or involvement with the mob still happening in Vegas? What year?
Roughly about 1986. There are two things happened around that time. One was the murder of Tony Spilotro, who was the Chicago mob's overseer in Las Vegas. That's the Joe Pesci character from Casino. And he was killed along with his brother and buried in an Indiana cornfield. So Chicago mob's involvement in Las Vegas kind of ended.
So that part of the movie was pretty accurate?
Except for in the movie, they had him buried alive.
Yeah.
That didn't happen. They killed him in a house in suburban Chicago, in the basement of a house in Bensonville by the airport, and then they took him out and buried
Can I
him.
ask you about that too, the gruesomeness of these things? Cement shoes, one mobster roasted people, and those stories got out.
Sociopath.
But was that also branding for the mafia? In other words, they want those stories to perpetuate so that you know if you do something wrong, that could happen to you? Or
I
were
think
these
there's-
guys nuts?
I think it's both. I think a lot of times the mob was very happy to take a .22 pistol and pop you in the back of the head a couple of times and allow for a normal funeral, right? So, you know, where you could have the casket open. But other times there were some guys who were just crazy, and they would do stuff like that, and they would, you know, just dispose of the bodies literally in any number of different ways. And that was to send a message. Oftentimes, it would sometimes leave them on the street corner, right in the ditch.
Well, in
So-
Philly, they did a lot of ones that were really visible in cars. I mean, I remember the gruesome photos for a period there.
Bruno.
It was public. Yeah, Bruno. It was public. And Philly, to that point, too. Philly, Angelo Bruno, I remember, lived in a row home in South Philadelphia and didn't show with the money.
Right.
Gotti was the first one that we saw that had a helicopter and a jet and a mansion and was huge, larger than life.
There were two cases that of where history repeats itself and where people don't learn from the past, right? Al Capone is the most famous mobster of all time, right? He was in Chicago. He ran the Chicago mob. He held press conferences. This was a guy who loved to talk to the media. He loved to invite reporters into his, I forget what floor he was on, hotel office, and he would just open up and tell you everything you wanted to know about what he was doing. Pretty unabashed. Well, what happened to him? He was convicted of tax evasion, and they sentenced him to 11 years in prison, end of his career. Mm-hmm. So you'd think somebody would learn from that. But John Gotti, 50 years later, he's like, oh, I'm going to strut down the street. I'm going to be interviewed by TV cameras. I'm going to put on a 4th of July event, remember? And he had all these hats,
Oh, yeah.
all that stuff. And he was so defiant in court. He did win his first 3 trials. And so he thought he was the Teflon Don. The tabloids loved him. He was on the front page of the Post all the time, the Daily News. What happened to him? He was convicted, went to prison, died in prison. You know, keeping a low profile is probably a good idea.
So on the other side of that, I worked at a swim club in Philadelphia, and there was a lawyer who did okay. All of a sudden, he became a mob lawyer. And he did Next Summer, Cabana, Rolls Royce, the whole bit. The mayor of Las Vegas, Oscar Goodman,
Good friend of mine.
good friend, represented some of the biggest mobsters in history.
He did, including Philadelphia mobsters.
Go ahead. So tell who he represented.
So Oscar was a lawyer here in Las Vegas for many years. He later became the mayor of Las Vegas. He is in retirement now. But Oscar got involved first with Meyer Lansky, defending him in Las Vegas. Then later he was defending the Tony Spilotro, whom I mentioned, the Joe Pesci character from Casino, and then Lefty Rosenthal, the Robert De Niro character from Casino. And then Oscar played himself in that movie. If you go back and watch it, he's the lawyer for these guys.
So this guy is, when you say mob associate, represented them.
He did. He would argue that he was not in the mob. He was not doing the bidding of the mob. He was a defense attorney, you know, defending their constitutional rights. And I think that's true.
I understand.
think, you know, and he would argue, it's not my words, it's his. He would argue that the federal agents did a lot of underhanded stuff to try to get these mob guys back in the day, and he proved that in court. And then his guys would often be acquitted. They would walk.
And after he was turned out, who became mayor?
So he was the mayor for 3 terms, and he was a very successful mayor. And we opened the Mob Museum under his tutelage. And then when he was 3 terms that he was term limited out, and then his wife became the mayor.
Sure.
And she's completing her third. She's completing her 3rd term now.
Did the movies get it right? Is that basically?
Often no, but I would say 2 movies that really hit home, and probably 3 that are the most famous ones, are the ones who get very close to getting it right, based on everything I know. You know, The Godfather is a completely fictional story, but basically Mario Puzo just looked at all the mob nonfiction literature there was, and he picked out the best stuff, and he turned it into The Godfather. And there are many, many mob guys from the 70s on who look back at The Godfather as being a very authentic movie. Yeah. If you talk to Puzo back in the day, he'd be like, I never know any mob guys. I just read a lot of books, but he got it right somehow. And he had Italian heritage. He kind of understood some things. Goodfellas is really an accurate portrayal of Henry Hill and that whole scene in the 70s and 80s in New York. Nick Pileggi was the writer of that, and Nick, another friend of the museum, he was a reporter during that time, and he knew everything that was going on. So that was very authentic. And then I think Casino is also an authentic film.
Movie,
And it's obviously, if you're a Las Vegas historian, you're going to nitpick the heck out of it. But the look and feel, the Joe Pesci, the Robert De Niro, the way they acted, the way they strutted around, the way the things kind of played out for them, not well, it's pretty accurate.
I noticed you didn't mention Bronx Tale, the musical, but okay, all right, that's fine.
You
So
go to Broadway.
because I know Peter, and Peter knows all kinds of people. We had an acquaintance who had a relationship, and I passed, because you mentioned John Gotti. I passed what he said was a great Mafia test. This was the test he gave me. He said, John Gotti gets out of jail and he comes with his guys to your restaurant. And they sit down and they order $20,000 worth of food and drink. One of his guys comes over at the end of the night and he says, we had a great time this evening. Thank you very much. What do we owe you? He said, what do you say? And I said, well, this would be my answer. I don't know if it's right. I said, I would say, you know what? I know this is a very special evening for Mr. Gotti. I'm very honored that he chose my facility to have this. I said, look, it would be nice if you just want to take care of my people. That would be lovely. I can't afford to do this all the time, but this is a special occasion. I'd like it to be my treat. But if you want to take care of my wait staff, that would be lovely. And our acquaintance said, that was the perfect answer. He said, if you had said, nope, it's on me, it's all me, he'd go, we got one. They'd come back time after time and expect the same thing. He said, if you had said, well, you owe me $20,000, they'd have paid you, and they'd come back later that night and burn your place down. He said, but you gave him the right answer. It was respectful. You said, I can't do it all the time. I'd go out of business. But, and you showed loyalty to your own people and you showed respect. He said that was the perfect. So I passed the Mafia test.
The only thing I think about from that is
Yeah.
2 weeks later, he goes and says, we're having a christening. It's a very special, it's special. He just does, you're the special occasion.
Yeah, you're a very special guy. Yeah.
Do you agree with that, by the way? Do you agree?
I think you're right. I think that makes sense. I will say though that it's interesting the connection between the Mafia and restaurants. That's where they do their work, right?
Yeah,
they don't
that's
have
the office,
they don't have
right?
actual
That's the
jobs, so
Yeah.
they sit around restaurants all the time and talk. And I don't know if that's good for business or bad for business. It depends.
So I went to, I had an ad agency in Philadelphia, and I had an older gentleman as part of my agency who did store display, because that used to be a big thing. Not much today, but like the big department stores would seasonally change their windows, and they paid a lot for that, and it was a specialty. So we went to New York together, because he had some stores, so we went to visit, and he said, you got to come to my favorite restaurant in the village. And we go sit in the restaurant, it's long and narrow, and we're the back table for like 12 people. We had just sat down to eat. They had poured the water. They had brought like antipasto. And all of a sudden, they come out. All these guys come out with them and go, sorry, we need your table. And as they're saying that, they're picking up the four corners of the tablecloths. Water is pouring, spilling, things are spilling, and guys are wiping and cleaning. And I start to go, and I'm starting to complain. And I see the guy going, no. And I'm going, I have no idea what clue, what are you doing? I've never seen anything like this. John Gotti had just gotten out of a car and was walking toward the restaurant with 6 guys.
And that's
By the time he got halfway to where we were standing, they had that table dry, a new tablecloth, and they were setting up placemats, and we all went, thank you. And he goes, it's on us. And it's on. I'd never seen anything like that. I mean, they were panicked to make sure that table was ready. New York, I've heard still to this day, if you're in the linen business, the trash business, there's still businesses that are somewhat controlled. Is that accurate?
Well, I think the Mafia still has its fingers in all kinds of stuff. It's more peripheral now. Like in the 70s and 80s, they pretty much controlled the concrete business, right? So if you wanted to build a high-rise in New York, the mob was going to get its piece. So if you're, Donald Trump or any other developer at that time, if you want to build a building, you've got to deal with the mob. That was a pretty powerful position for them. I don't think they're at that level now, but like you say, linens and different things, they find their way into all kinds of nooks and crannies.
Amazing. So when we talked, I knew you were coming in, and I knew your background. We said, a lot of people know a lot about the Mafia, or hear things, and they're fascinated. But I said, there's got to be some wows that people don't know, maybe haven't bubbled to the surface, stories that you'd like to tell. Is there anything like that comes to your mind that is something that we may not know about the Mafia that would surprise us?
Well, I would say one thing, it's kind of pop culture related, I would mention, is we mentioned Bugsy Siegel earlier, right? And there's a famous movie, Bugsy, Warren Beatty, which makes it, there's this scene in Bugsy where they're driving to Las Vegas. It's him and Mickey Cohen and Virginia Hill, Annette Bening. And they're in the car, and they're approaching Las Vegas, and Bugsy says, pull off on the side of the highway. And so they pull off on the side of the highway. Siegel walks out into the desert, vast desert, nothing there except mountains and sagebrush. And they think he's going to, take a leak, frankly. And he gets out there and he has this vision, right? It sits there and he looks and he somehow sees something that nobody else sees. And he comes back to the car and he describes his vision of a casino in Las Vegas that is nicer than any other casino, that it's going to attract a Hollywood crowd to Las Vegas. There's a huge problem with that because it's a fictional movie, first of all, and people believe it. And so they think that Bugsy Siegel invented Las Vegas partly as a result of this movie. But here's what really happened. What really happened is a man named Billy Wilkerson was famous in his day. He was the owner of the Hollywood Reporter newspaper and had the Ciro's and some other big-time restaurants, Sunset Strip. And he was a gambler. He was a terrible gambler. And he's very bad. He lost a lot of money. But somebody said to him, Billy, you probably ought to own the casino. You'd do better than if you were gambling in it. So he comes up with the idea to buy a piece of property on the edge of Las Vegas, which he does. We have the down payment check, the original down payment check on display in the museum, $5,000. And he buys this piece of property and starts building a casino that he calls the Flamingo. He's spending a couple of months working on this, but he's also gambling down the street in these casinos. He's just a horrible gambler. He's losing tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he runs out of money. So he doesn't have money to finish the Flamingo. What does he do? He knows some guys. He knows Meyer Lansky. He knows Bugsy Siegel. So maybe they'll invest in my casino. So these guys agree that they want to participate. And Meyer Lansky, who was the big boss at that time, he sends Bugsy, who had been living in L.A., he sends him to Las Vegas. He says, keep an eye on our investment. So Siegel takes a liking to this Flamingo project. He's on the construction site standing side by side with Billy Wilkerson and Del Webb, and they're talking it through. And Bugsy, though, sees this as his opportunity to go legit, right? He is going to get out of the gangster business and become a legitimate casino operator. And he pushes Billy Wilkerson out to the extent that Billy Wilkerson is afraid for his life, flees to Paris because he's afraid he's going to get bumped. So now Bugsy's in charge, and Bugsy takes over the Flamingo. He opens the Flamingo himself, and eventually is starting to do well. But by then he's worn out his welcome, and he is killed in 1947. About 8 months after the Flamingo opens. So everybody now says, well, Bugsy Siegel invented Las Vegas. It was Billy Wilkerson's idea. And Billy Wilkerson had full intentions of being the operator of this casino. It was simply because of this threat on his life that he got out.
And what did you do in Paris? Did he still get? Did he find a place?
He went to Paris for a while. He came back. He did come back. The threat apparently was over after a while. But Billy just liked Paris, so it was a good escape for him.
What? Wow.
All right.
That's something.
Jeff, between you, the cameras are not rolling. Nobody's recording. The museum that you're on, they got a piece? They got a piece?
Somebody always says, it would be a great movie if the Mob Museum were the front
Oh
For the
my
mob.
God! Oh my
Right,
God!
yeah,
What a
yeah,
brilliant,
yeah.
brilliant movie.
Yeah.
But no, I think we're a nonprofit. We're clean as a whistle.
Have you ever gotten anything from any of the families or the bosses that said, we would prefer that you not do this, or their hands off, they don't care? They don't.
So one little story, we had a speaker at the museum, a guy named John A. Light. And John A. Light is well known. He has a podcast, I think. And John A. Light was in the Gotti mob back in the day, mostly with Junior Gotti. Mm-hmm. And then he flipped and became a witness against Junior Gotti. So we had John A. Light come and speak at the museum, and the Gotti family was very unhappy with this development, so much so that they requested the return of an item that we had on display in the museum. So we complied.
And did others say, I want you to have my dad's teeth that they found at a scene or anything like that, or a shoe, a burnt shoe? Or
Nothing like that. I think most of the descendants of mob guys are very happy with us and like to participate. They donate things to us. They sell
So talk
things
about
to
that
us.
before you go. Talk about what's in the museum. People come to Vegas, you should see the museum.
Sure. We have hundreds of artifacts on display. They have to do both with law enforcement and the mob, so they're all mob related, but they also come from the law enforcement side. But we have a pistol that was owned by Al Capone. We have the bricks to the wall against which the men were lined up in the St. Valentine's Day massacre in Chicago. And that's a whole story. But we have those bricks, and we reassembled the wall, and you can see it. Some of the bricks have little pockmarks in them for where they missed.
You bought the wall?
We did. We bought the bricks, about 400 bricks.
Oh, my.
And there was a guy, the building was torn down in 1967. This is on the north side, Lincoln Park, part of Chicago. And the building was torn down. And before it was torn down, this guy named George Patey very cleverly said, I want those bricks. And he bought those bricks from the demolition crew, and he took them to Vancouver, of all places. He was Canadian, and he put them in a nightclub that he had there in Vancouver for a while. Well, he died. His niece inherited the bricks. She just happened to live in Las Vegas. She lives about a mile from me now. And she had the bricks, and when she heard that the Mob Museum was going to be built, she called and said, hey, I've got these bricks. We verified their authenticity, and we bought them, and we've had them on display ever since. So that's a great artifact.
We'll
My mother would have been wrong about that. What do you need bricks?
Yeah,
What do
she
you
would
need?
know.
Some people have vision.
she would have thrown him out.
She
when
would have
you were
thrown him out when
My
I was
mother,
in college.
I had
That's
Beatles
right.
card and stuff
Yeah.
all thrown out.
Your
All
Mad
thrown out.
magazines and those bricks.
I
Gone.
had $80 billion worth of
Garbage.
baseball cards. What did you do? What did you do?
We could build a whole nother museum with stuff that got thrown out.
Oh,
Right,
I
exactly,
can't even. Well, thank you for
exactly.
coming. Thank you for
Thank
coming in, and thanks
Fantastic.
for. It's a fantastic thing, and also not to promote another podcast, but your podcast series is brilliant on the.
Well, thank you. And we do that in partnership with the Las Vegas Review-Journal newspaper, and they do a great job.
Really amazing stuff in there that we didn't cover here. But wowie, zowie. So thank you. I really
I
appreciate
can't believe
it.
we got out of this.
Are we in any trouble, by the way?
Yeah,
Anything
that's
we
what I was
said?
gonna say.
Do they have a sense of humor? Are the people still alive? Are they
Yeah.
too old? They can't hear or see? Or are we on a scale of 1 to 10?
I think you're safe.
Thank goodness.
Thank God.
Thank goodness.
Thank God.
Getting out
Small
of Vegas.
things.
I'm getting out of Vegas
Small
right after
things.
this anyway.
Not fast enough.
Anyway,
Don't even
I
tell
know.
them we're here. We're not even here.
Googleheim, I'm sorry we didn't get right to you.
Yeah,
For
David.
corrections, clarifications, information. Where are you?
Yes, well, the biggest thing is on corrections is you're supposed to go to me before now, so I'll let that one
we
slide.
got all
Listen.
caught up in it. Excuse us.
What are you going to do? Shoot
Just
us?
saying, I will
We
take-
know
Hey, you know
people.
what, David? What happens in Vegas
Watch your
stays
mouth,
in Vegas.
David.
So
Watch
shut
your
up.
people.
mouth.
I know people.
You're going to be the first guy in the kick the nuts version of the show. So
I do want to let you guys know that you might not know it, but your producer on site is Sicilian, so perhaps, I don't know. She might
Oh, boy.
you know she hasn't been in here the whole time. She's been out making calls, and I don't know about that.
Oh, she. Yeah, and just one final thing. I've always found this one to be very interesting. The Godfather and Mario Puzo's The Godfather novel made one very noticeable mistake that mobsters would recognize immediately.
Give us a hint.
They called the
give us
Don.
okay.
Okay. It's about the Don. What did they call him in the movie?
They called him Don Corleone.
Don Corleone. That's incorrect.
Great accent,
It
David. Yeah.
should be, and they made. Yeah,
Don
I know.
Vito.
Thank you. I'm Don Vito. It should be Don Vito.
Ah.
The first name.
First name?
not
First
the
name?
last
Really?
First name. Yeah. yeah.
So
You'll
wait,
see
wait,
in
wait,
Godfather
wait,
Part
wait,
2,
wait.
they
Hold
go
on.
Don Vito. Don
So if
Vito.
his parents had named him Timmy,
Don
really,
Timmy.
Don Timmy?
Yeah.
That doesn't strike
And
fear in
Timmy.
anybody. Don Henry, Don Hal.
Yeah.
Doesn't work.
Yeah.
Doesn't work.
Yeah.
Well,
First name.
David, you
Oh yeah,
performed-
and you.
By the way, speaking about
Yeah.
that real quick before we go out, Jason, I'm going to give you some mob names, and you tell me if they're actual mob names or made up mob names.
Okay, I can do this. I can do it. I got it. I got it. I got it.
Okay.
He's
Here we go.
prepared. Completely.
Don't look at
prepared.
don't look.
I'm not
okay.
looking at anything. I'm looking at you. I'm looking at nothing.
Israel, the ice pick Willie Alderman.
What?
Israel, the ice pick Willie Alderman.
Israel being part of the name?
His first name Israel, nickname Ice Pick Willie Alderman.
Yes, true.
Used to put an ice pick in people's ears into their brain to take them out,
Sure.
so somewhat undetectable.
Sure.
Louis Haha Atanasio Jr.
No.
It's a real name. Every time he heard a murder, he'd laugh. So they gave him the name Haha. Ready for this?
Yeah.
Jackie Giant Gonads Di Stefano.
No.
That's fake. Thomas the Wig Bellotti.
Yes.
That's exactly true.
Yes.
Gino G, your hair smells lovely like Catella.
No,
Okay,
shut
fine,
up.
okay. Richard Shellackhead Cantarella.
No.
Yes.
That's a real name.
Get
that's
outta
it.
here.
Yep.
Oh my God.
Louis Eggs Consalvo.
Sure.
It's true.
Yeah.
Frankie Three
Wait,
Fingers.
why was he Louis Eggs? Like eggs.
How did he die? High cholesterol. Frankie Three Fingers Coppola.
Yeah, sure. He had 3 fingers on one hand.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Three fingers in one hand.
Yeah.
George Butterass DeCiccio.
No.
Yes. Butterass. Butter.
What? Come on.
Born 1929, George Butterass DeCiccio, and I don't know how he got the
no,
name.
I don't believe you until you until you tell me how he got the name.
Googleheim.
According to Gianni Russo, a real-life mobster and actor who appeared in The Godfather Part 1 and Part 2, he's also a killer, although it was ruled a justifiable homicide. But, and even worse, he's a podcaster too, so you can check him out there. But anyway, this former mobster, Gianni Russo, has confirmed that the John Gotti era mobster named George Butterass DeCiccio was so named because his ass was as big as a cow's. Mob poetry. Back to the show.
By the way, I think we should get a podcast award for the kind of work we do.
Right.
Nobody else
We
will
don't
hear
leave
that.
any
You will
stone
hear that in the world.
unturned.
And by the way, our gentleman from the Mob Museum has not left. He's sitting here watching.
Right.
Do you have a butter ass exhibit?
We do not have a butter ass.
Will you after
Well,
this?
then
Now,
let me tell you,
but
your whole
are-
museum is a fesso.
You're intrigued now, though. You are intrigued, right?
I am. You know, I talked to Shellackhead, though. He owns a body shop in Phoenix.
Oh my God!
That's true.
I've talked to Shellackhead, and on that you can't beat that.
That's it.
But we're gonna follow up with you because I know you. You're a journalist. You're gonna look up the butter ass story, aren't
Yeah.
you? Yes, you
Yep.
are.
We will find out that story.
And by the
about
way,
how
I'm
Butterass
guessing
got
whoever named him that,
Yep.
no longer with us. Wow. Thank you, everybody.
funny to you how? Like a clown funny? Like
Yeah,
a
like a-
Butterass? Yeah.
And with that, we say from Las Vegas.
Really, no, really.